Thanks in large part to the boatload of picks they got back in the Russell Wilson trade, the Seahawks have built one of the best young stables in the NFL. But do they have the most under-25 talent in the league? We'll be breaking it all down in our Tuesday episode of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A special thanks, as always, to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening on the eastern part of the state in Moses Lake, Washington, or down in Norman, Oklahoma. Greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We are now under 2 weeks until the start of training camp. Going to be diving into a special Tuesday mailbag. We haven't had a mailbag for almost a week and a half because of all the crazy stuff going on with guests and a lot of training camp storylines. Going to get to your mailbag questions today and continue our top 90 countdown on the roster, looking at numbers 30 through 28. Jam-packed episode brought your way by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Ever since John Schneider orchestrated a trade that really stunned the entire NFL in March 2022, sending Russell Wilson to the Denver Broncos, Seattle has been able to build one of the best young rosters in the NFL, and much of the backbone of that group is with those first and second round picks coming courtesy of the Broncos. You look at some of the players Seattle's been able to bring in because of those draft picks they got from Denver. Charles Cross, who they still believe can be a foundational left tackle, even though last year he didn't take the step forward they hoped that he would. Devin Witherspoon last year, a Pro Bowler, Defensive Rookie of the Year finalist, a player they're very excited about with all-pro upside. And they brought in some players like Ken Walker III, who were acquired with picks coming over from the Denver Broncos. So they really were able to build this foundation that, in my opinion, at least deserves to be in the top 5 when you're looking at the best teams in the league in terms of talent under the age of 25. ESPN this past week came out with their own under 25 rankings, and I'll admit, I think the Seahawks are way too low. Seattle came in at number 10, and I understand that there are some questions, particularly when you look at the offensive side of the football, where offensive line-wise, Olu Oluwatimi has started one game. He's 24. Christian Haynes coming into the league at 24 as a rookie out of UConn, hasn't started any games. Anthony Bradford started 10 games last year, but very up and down performance in that time. So I get the offensive line situation, but the article by Aaron Schatz on ESPN didn't even reference Ken Walker III. When you're talking about impact players under the age of 25, 2 straight years with over 1,000 scrimmage yards. He's one of the most explosive backs in the league. The Seahawks brought in Sam Howell, who started 18 games last year. Might be their quarterback in the future. We don't know where that's heading, but you got another good running back in Zach Charbonnet. Jackson Smith-Njigba is 22 years old. You got him with one of your 2 first-round picks a couple years ago, and you believe that he's got a chance to break out this year. I think when you just look at the offensive talent that the Seahawks have under the age of 25, Abraham Lucas is also still 25 years old. If he comes back healthy and can stay healthy, that is going to certainly boost the ranking for this football team under 25 talent. There are a lot of pieces there, and yet maybe the most high upside pieces on this roster are on the defensive side. And this is really where the 10th overall ranking I find way too low for the Seahawks. When you look at some of the established talent Seattle already has on this roster that is 25 and under, Boye Mafe had 9.5 sacks last year. This is a player that could be a perennial double-digit sack caliber player once he puts everything together. I still think that he's quite a ways from his ceiling, but we saw last year a glimpse of what he's capable of doing. Witherspoon, as I just mentioned, he was a Pro Bowler. He was a Defensive Rookie of the Year finalist. He put up a stat line that no rookie had put up since 1999. So he had a phenomenal first season in Mike McDonald's defense. I think he's got a chance to be even more dominant in his second season. Reek Woolen didn't have a great sophomore year, but he was fantastic his rookie season, and he's only 25. And then you got Byron Murphy, your first-round pick. I get some of these guys, we haven't seen him play in an NFL game yet, but this is a player that the Seahawks believe absolutely is going to be a stud in the league. And he's coming in at just 21. This was a draft class with a lot of older incoming prospects. Murphy was one of those few 21-year-olds that got drafted early. So you're looking at a player that could have 9 seasons before he turns 30. I mean, you get a chance to really put together a long, successful career, and he's going to get a lot of snaps early for the Seahawks, even with the talent they already have on that defensive line. I think when you just look at the talent on offense and defense the Seahawks have built up, I have no objection to the first 2 teams that were on this ranking from ESPN. The Houston Texans coming in at number 1. Quarterback is always going to carry more weight than any other position. We saw what C.J. Stroud did last year as a rookie for the Texans, getting him to the divisional round of the AFC playoffs and putting up the numbers he did under 10 interceptions as a rookie and really dicing up opponents. Tank Dell, who they got as a receiver in last year's class before his injury late in the season, was having a fantastic rookie year. The Texans have brought in a lot of really fun pieces. Will Anderson on defense, I have no objection. That would be my first team, in part because of the quarterback, obviously, but you've also got the pass rusher. Will Anderson has a chance to be really special. And the Detroit Lions at number 2, Aiden Hutchinson, Jameson Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs. There's a number of key players. Jack Campbell, their linebacker from Iowa that they drafted last year. They have done a fantastic job of building that roster up with young talent, and that's part of the reason they got to the NFC Championship last year. And this is a team that is still viewed as one of the Super Bowl frontrunners in the NFC going into this season. They've had this youth movement. They have got a ton of really good players that are 23, 24 years old that are just going to be coming into their prime. So I have no objection with those teams. But after that, I think you can make an argument because some of this has got to boil down to established players. And I get the Seahawks don't have a quarterback that's been on their roster that has started games for them. I mean, Sam Howell threw 21 touchdowns last year. He's 23. It feels like that's still got to carry a little bit of weight here. He put up some numbers with a bad Washington Commanders football team last year. Ken Walker III, Jackson Smith and Jigba came on late last year. Charbonnet's got a chance to be really good. I get that he's not going to be a player that's going to swing the rankings much. The O-line's a big question mark there, but on defense, you've got 2 Defensive Rookie of the Year finalists in your secondary for the last 2 years that should both be excellent fits in Mike Macdonald's defense. Byron Murphy's upside. I still think Mike Morris has a chance to be a really solid player, now reunited with his former college defensive coordinator in Mike Macdonald. There are pieces on this team. Boye Mafe, as I said, could be a double-digit, maybe a 12, 13, 14 sack guy at some point. He's got that kind of talent, and he's still kind of a raw player. So I just think when you look at this football team with the way that it's constructed, are there questions with some of these younger players that are going to be asked to play big roles? Yes, particularly in the offensive line. We get to see what Oluwatimi and Bradford or Haynes is going to be able to provide for this offensive line. McClendon Curtis is another player that we can lump in there if he somehow wins that job at right guard. They need some players to emerge as long-term starters in the interior of their offensive line. But I think when you look at the skilled positions, Seattle's done a fantastic job on both sides of the football of not just drafting well, but they've taken advantage of those high picks, bringing in some impact players that are under 25 years of age. I guess several of these guys that are 22, 23, when these rankings come out next year, they're still going to be on there. So I think that this is one of those top 3 or 4 teams in terms of under 25 talent. And that has to be an exciting thing for Mike Macdonald. It's got to be exciting for the fan base, knowing that we've got this foundation in place that could be even better if we're able to hit on 1 or 2 of these offensive linemen. If Byron Murphy is the impact player that we believe he's going to be, maybe somebody like Tyrese Knight emerges down the line and becomes a really good starting linebacker. There's some ifs here. There's no question about it. And you always have that when you look at these rankings with young players coming in. Rookies, we don't know what to expect till they actually hit the regular season game field, and we get a chance to see what they can do. But I think when you stack Seattle's roster up with just the hits they've had early in the draft, late in the draft the last couple years, and the value positions. I get running back that has been devalued, and maybe that's why Ken Walker III was not mentioned. But you just look at some of the other positions Seattle's really been able to hit on. I think Jackson really here. That pick could look really darn good. Boy, Moff, a pass rusher, that is an incredibly valued position. Devin Witherspoon, I know corners maybe not the most valued spot, but when you get a guy that can do everything like Devin Witherspoon in a pass-happy NFL, a guy that can get after the quarterback, can cover, can play slot, can play outside, that kind of a player is invaluable as well. So I don't think that Seattle's got the best under 25 core, but I think that they are very close. And I would put them right there behind the Houston Texans, Detroit Lions. Maybe there's a few other teams that can stake a claim to the number 3 or 4 spot. But I think that Seattle very much deserves to be in that range rather than 10. That feels way too low with the already established players that Seattle has. And this is a chance to be a group that scores a lot better based on the metrics ESPN has next year if some of these offensive linemen hit. If this incoming rookie class has 3 or 4 guys that are able to factor in immediately, then Seattle's going to score even better next year. There's some question marks, but I absolutely think that this is one of the best young rosters in the NFL, and that had to be a major draw for Mike Macdonald to come to the Seattle Seahawks and replace Pete Carroll as the new head coach. Up next, it's been a while since we've opened up the mailbag. I'm going to be tackling your questions here on our Tuesday mailbag, and that'll be coming up next here on Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the WNBA, and much more. You can bet on it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 win or lose. After recording the first triple-double by a rookie in league history, is Caitlin Clark still a frontrunner to win WNBA Rookie of the Year, or has Angel Reese got that award now on lockdown? Is second-round pick Bronny James Jr. going to exceed expectations and compete for a Rookie of the Year playing with his father? Does Aaron Judge have another home run in his bat for the Yankees heading into the All-Star break? You can bet on it all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com today and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Tuesday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks, as always, to all the 12s who are tuning in, and thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. We have not had a mailbag on this show for nearly 2 weeks, and it's been because of all the awesome guests we've had on, and it's time for us to get to some of those questions. There have been plenty of them coming on social media. I'm looking forward to answering as many as I can here on today's show. Let's get to our first one. This one coming from Kels_206 on X. Do you see it being possible that Devin Witherspoon could win Defensive Player of the Year this season if he gets to 5+ sacks, 5+ interceptions mark? I will say this right now. If Devin Witherspoon goes out and gets 5 sacks and he intercepts 5 passes, it would be a travesty if he is not the Rookie of the Year or the Defensive Player of the Year. Won't be a rookie this season, but he is a player that can do so many things at an elite level. Corners just don't rack up that many sacks and interceptions. It just doesn't happen. If he's able to put up a stat line like that, then he absolutely has a chance to be Defensive Player of the Year. I think the sacks is probably the tougher one there. I know he got 3 last year, though. This is an aggressive defense. He's going to get his chances to go after the quarterback. He only had 1 pick last year. I do think this is a player that's very capable of racking up a bunch of interceptions, though, especially if everybody else around him is playing well in the secondary and quarterbacks kind of have to pick their poison instead of just avoiding him in the slot. So I do think Witherspoon's got the talent to be able to do this if he does. If he can get to 5 sacks, 5 interceptions, or higher values in those 2 stats, barring a historic sack season by a pass rusher, somebody like a TJ Watt, this would absolutely be the stat line needed for a corner to win Defensive Player of the Year in 2024. So I think those numbers would definitely bode well for his chances to win that award. Dorian on Threads, is Matt Judon a realistic possibility for the Seahawks to trade for with his past relationship with Mike Macdonald? So I'm going to say no for right now. There's a couple reasons why this is not going to be happening before training camp or early in training camp. For one thing, the Patriots are not going to be trading one of their best players before the season starts. I don't expect New England to be competitive in the playoff hunt, but this is a team that's got a new coach in Gerard Mayo. They're going to want to keep as many of their good defensive players around as they can to try to give themselves a chance to win games. potentially having a rookie quarterback playing a lot of snaps at some point this year as well. They're going to need that defense to be really rock solid. So I don't see New England trading him away. He also has a massive salary. Seattle would not be able to absorb his salary cap hit for 2024 without making additional moves. So I don't see this move happening right now. But what I will say is if you get to the trade deadline, near the trade deadline, and the New England Patriots are out of the race, Judon's 31 years old. If the Seahawks feel like they need a little bit more juice off the edge and they need a guy that really knows Mike Macdonald's defense, Judon played for Macdonald in Baltimore, played it for him as a linebacker coach. If you get to the point there where you feel like, hey, we're contending for the NFC West right now, but we need a little more juice in this pass rush, the salary cap hit would be half because half the season's already been played. At that point, that is where John Schneider likes to have that $7-8 million in salary cap cushion. That's why you restructure Draymond Jones in the middle of June so that you have that flexibility to be able to trade for somebody. It would cost probably a mid-round draft pick to bring him in because of the salary cap hit. But I think at that point, then it would be very plausible that the Seahawks would make a trade. There's a lot of things that have to happen before that could be orchestrated, though, at the trade deadline. DK Wookie1 tweets, looking at free agency, which two players would you bring in to elevate the roster at the present? So I'll say this question's got a whole bunch of free agent options here. Linebacker, you've got Cunningham, Alexander Leonard, three players we talked about with Lofa Tatupu last week. At edge, Yannick Ngakoue, Lawson, Bowser, center Connor Williams, running back. I'm just going to skip running back because I don't think Seattle needs to go anywhere there. And then at safety, you've got Justin Simmons and the two former Seahawks, Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs, still out there. So if I was going to add any players from this list, I would stick probably with one of the linebackers. In this case, I still think Shaq Leonard's a guy that's worth buying low on, but Zach Cunningham is also a player that would make sense. Either one of those guys to try to further bolster your inside linebacker group. And as far as another position, I would be more than happy to take an opportunity to sign Carl Lawson because I know the Jets, he was down in the depth chart last year, didn't get a chance to produce much. But this is a guy that has been productive in his career, and I think he's a good fit in a hybrid 3-4 defense. You probably can get him for pennies on the dollar at this stage. So I think getting another edge rusher there, then you don't have to trade for Matt Judon. Judon's a better player, but you'd have to give up a lot more to get him. So those would be the two free agents there. I would be looking on defense. Connor Williams, I don't know if he's going to be ready to play anytime soon coming off an ACL tear. And I think the Seahawks are confident in Oluwatimi. So I think it would be one of those defensive players that I mentioned that would make the most sense for the Seahawks to bring in free agency. Mikey on Threads, what is your biggest training camp curiosity heading into this year for the Seahawks? You know, there's a lot of them because this is a new coaching staff. And I know we got to watch OTAs and got to watch mini camp. We haven't seen padded practices yet in the Mike Macdonald era. So for me, the biggest curiosity is what is this coaching staff going to do when it comes to practicing tackling? Because that was my biggest issue with Pete Carroll for as long as I can remember. I know that there are limitations, what you can do and what you want to do during a practice. You don't want to get guys hurt, but you have to have players prepared to tackle opponents when they get on the field in week one. And with a lot of starters not playing in the preseason, it's even more imperative to have the drills in place to make sure your guys are ready to go for week one. I want to see what they're going to be doing. I was already encouraged by some of the stuff I saw on the practice field this spring, but when the pads come out, I want to see what this team is doing from a practice standpoint to get that tackling situation remedied. They had the third most missed tackles in the NFL last year. That will not be acceptable this year for Mike Macdonald. So they're going to be asking these players to clean that up. I want to see what they do in the practice field from that regard. That's really a major intrigue for me compared to the last coaching regime. This Bellu tweets, why do you think, or who do you think makes the biggest jump on defense under Mike Macdonald this year? You know, there's a couple guys that I could mention. I've thrown out Devin Witherspoon, even though he was already a defensive rookie of the year candidate last year. I just think the scheme is perfect for him. I've thrown out names such as Mike Morris coming off his injury, maybe a player like Tyrell Dodson who gets his first chance to start and he's with a linebacker guru like Mike Macdonald. But I'm still going to go with Draymond Jones for the answer on this question because I was encouraged by what I saw late last year when he had more snaps off the edge. I like his positional versatility. I felt like he was a player that the Seahawks just really didn't know what to do to maximize his ability last year. I don't think Mike McDonald and his staff are going to have that same problem. And so I still think this is a very talented player. I think this coaching staff is going to put him in positions to be much more successful. So I'm excited to see what he can do playing in this scheme with his positional versatility in particular. B. Borstrabor tweets, are you surprised Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams have not been picked up? Well, I will say this. I'm mildly surprised Quandre Diggs has not been signed at this point because Diggs, I know a couple years ago he broke his leg, but he came back and was a Pro Bowler the next season. I still think that he's got some juice left in the tank, and there's some teams out there that could certainly use his veteran presence in the secondary. So I'm a little bit surprised. At the same time, these veteran safeties, there's a bunch of them. We just threw out the name Justin Simmons. He still doesn't have a new team going into this year. And I still think Justin Simmons is a top 5 caliber safety, but that's just kind of where things are at that position group. Teams don't want to spend on aging players at safety. And then Jamal Adams, the injuries and the fact that he just didn't look very good last year when he was on the field, it just didn't look like anything close to his former self. That I'm not surprised about. Do I think somebody's going to kick the tires on him? Absolutely. I expect Quandre Diggs is going to have a job when training camp comes around here end of this month, but I'm more surprised that Diggs is still available out there. Adams, I'm not, because of the injury history, and there's just a lot of reasons. There's been teams that have looked at him. I haven't heard anything on teams looking at Quandre Diggs, so who knows? But I expect that both these guys are going to get their opportunities early in training camp to at least compete for a roster spot with somebody, if not a starting job somewhere. Last question here from James on Threads. What are you most excited to see at joint practices? Well, I haven't had a chance to look at all of the Titans roster just yet. So from a personnel standpoint, maybe there aren't matchups that I'm necessarily curious to watch, although I do want to see Jeffrey Simmons going up against his interior offensive line. That is a really fun training camp test for that interior group. Fun in the sense for me watching it, not fun for Seattle's interior offensive linemen because Jeffrey Simmons is really good. But that's a good litmus test to see where this interior offensive line for the Seahawks is at. And I just want to see how they actually handle these practices, because Pete Carroll never did joint practices, and you can control the elements more than you can in a preseason game. I want to see just how much they go towards the line in terms of how physical it's going to be, what they allow the guys to do, and just having the opportunity to hit somebody else other than their own teammates. And so that's going to be an exciting thing for me as a reporter, getting to see that from the sidelines. And I'm looking forward to the trench play when these guys are in pads going against different competition. We'll probably get our biggest, most extended look at the starters during that time, since they're not going to be playing much, if at all, in preseason games. Up next, I'm going to continue our 90-man countdown. We are going into the 20s. We've got numbers 30 through 28. That'll be coming up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there for tuning in. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Are you tired of all the screaming on ESPN or Fox Sports, whatever stations you're listening to on TV? Give Locked On Sports Today a chance to remedy that issue. Get your insight, analysis, breaking news, the top stories of the day, without all the screaming. Again, that's Locked On Sports Today. You can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Continuing our 90-man profiles, we are now into the 20s, numbers 30 through 28 today. We're really starting to get into some starter caliber players, some really intriguing rookies as well, maybe some journeyman veterans coming in that may have a bigger role than anticipated. At least there's quality insurance policies. Going to be starting off with the potential starter from this group, and that is cornerback Tre Brown. And last year was kind of an odd year for Tre Brown. He was fully recovered after that knee injury he suffered 2 years ago. In the 2022 season, when he did come back, only got limited snaps, wasn't quite all the way back physically. He was healthy enough to play, but it takes time with those patellar tendon injuries. And then last year, he got up to a fast start. He had an interception returned for a touchdown in that big win over the Lions in Detroit, had another interception, so his first 2 picks in his NFL career. Things were going well, and then he had a few games where penalties really started to become an issue. There were some questionable ones, in my opinion, there, but Mike Jackson ends up getting the nod in a few games late in the year in his place. And so Brown kind of found himself in a little bit of no man's territory late in the season. Even though he played well in the first couple of months, didn't get near as many snaps down the stretch. Now, and been getting most of the snaps when Seattle's had three corners on the field together when they've been in nickel packages. He has been at the left cornerback spot opposite of Arik Woolen, while Devin Witherspoon has been in the slot. And I think his aggressiveness, his physical play style, the fact that this is a guy that you can blitz a little bit, I think that his versatility and his skill set is actually going to be a better fit in this scheme than what it was in Pete Carroll's defense. And so I think he's got a really good chance to lock down that starting job. Mike Jackson might have something to say about that. That's going to be a fun competition there for that third cornerback spot. But Tre Brown has been a player that has flashed at times, and I think that he has enough talent. He's a guy that's going to do a contract year, a player that the Seahawks drafted in the fourth round a few years back. There's plenty of reasons why the Seahawks would want to give him an extended look here to see, could he still be part of their long-term plans in that secondary? So I think he's got a good chance to win that job. But if Mike Jackson beats him out, you're looking at a situation where Brown hasn't played any snaps in the slot. He might just be relegated to special teams and going into a contract year. That is not the result that you want. I think he's got a good chance to be a starter if they're going to be primarily playing nickel, as I anticipate they're going to be. But he's still got to fend off Mike Jackson. So that's going to be one of the more intriguing competitions on the defensive side of the football. Now, going to the 2024 rookie class, I talked about Pharaoh Brown yesterday. If there's a reason Pharaoh Brown could have a more diminished role than anticipated when the Seahawks signed him as a free agent back in March, it's because of the presence of rookie A.J. Barner. Now, you look at the college stats, this is not a player, whether at Indiana his first 4 years or transferring to Michigan last year. Not a high-volume pass catcher, didn't have a lot of receptions, not a lot of yards after the catch. Scored a few touchdowns last year for Michigan. You watch the film, and it looks like there could be more there than what Michigan asked him to do. At the same time, that's a lot of projection. This could be a player that ends up participating in the passing game a little bit more in the NFL, but we don't know if that is going to be the case. What he does bring, one thing that's tangible here, Jay Harbaugh, the new special teams coach coming from Michigan, he got to work with A.J. Barner last year. This is a kid that is a really sound special teams player. He played basically every special teams unit for the Wolverines last year. So I think that gives him a great chance to get some snaps early for the Seahawks. I expect Pharaoh Brown is going to be the number 2 tight end to open the year. If Barner can show some more promise as a pass catcher, though, if there's some untapped potential there that his college teams didn't necessarily get out of him just because the offense they had, Michigan ran the ball a lot. Barner was an excellent blocker, but if he is a better receiver than advertised, he's 6'6", there's some athleticism there. If he can flash as a pass catcher in training camp in the preseason, things could get interesting there for that number 2 tight end spot, at least during the midst of the season. I could see A.J. Barner by the second half of the year passing over Pharaoh Brown and being the number 2 tight end because there's certainly some skills there. He is a feisty run blocker. And again, watching the film, the catches he had, you see some talent there that the numbers don't reflect. So I'm wondering if he could be a player that's a better pass catcher in the NFL than he was at college. But until we actually see him on the field, that is just a projection. At minimum, I think he's going to be a really solid special teams player for the Seahawks. As far as journeymen go, George Fant started his career in Seattle as an undrafted rookie out of Western Kentucky. He was a basketball player, hadn't played any offensive line for the Hilltoppers. He started some games for the Seahawks as a rookie, despite how raw he was and that lack of experience. Just a great athlete and really quick learner. And he's ended up turning into a solid starter, at least spot starter caliber player. He's got over 1,000 career snaps at both tackle positions. Seattle happily welcomed him back in free agency. In fact, they gave him a pretty solid deal as a backup tackle, and a lot of that revolves around Abraham Lucas's health. He missed all but 6 games last year, and some of those games he didn't play very many snaps in. On top of that, the Seahawks want to make sure that they are better equipped to be able to withstand an injury to either Lucas or Cross. If Lucas is not able to bounce back as the team hopes with some of the knee issues he's had, if the surgery doesn't remedy the problem, George Fant gives them a player that has played a ton of snaps in the league. He can start at both spots in a pinch. He is a great locker room guy. He's become a mentor for some of the young players in Seattle's roster. So, I mean, Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas are both going to benefit immensely from having George Fant around with his experiences going from an undrafted rookie with no prior football experience really to turning into a starter for the New York Jets and the Houston Texans over the last several years. So this is a guy that has been through a lot. He's had a lot of different experiences on the football field. He's a well-respected veteran. So he's going to bring a lot to the table and certainly an upgrade in the backup tackle spot because of his versatility, his starting experience. But there's a chance he could start some games this year if they have any injuries in the tackle spot. He is going to be jumping in at either spot because he has played so many snaps at both positions. Right now, he's getting his reps at right tackle because of Abraham Lucas, the uncertainty there. He didn't participate in OTAs and minicamp. But Fant is a player that can give you some solid pass protection. He's still a really good athlete. You can get him up to the second level in the run game on screens. So you can do some fun stuff with him. You could use him as that sixth offensive lineman. Number 74 is now eligible. Maybe we'll be hearing that more again in Seattle. But he's a guy that I think still has a chance to give Seattle some contributions on offense, even if Abraham Lucas and Charles Cross stay healthy. If either one of those guys gets banged up for any amount of time, though, you do have that insurance policy that they quite frankly did not have last year. As admirable as the performance was for players like Stone Forsythe, George Fant has a much better resume. He has started more games in the NFL, has been consistently a better player. So this is an upgrade for Seattle from a depth perspective. And at worst, he's going to be a guy that gives you that swing tackle that, yeah, you're paying him quite a bit for that role, not playing a lot of snaps, but you love to have an insurance policy protecting your quarterback at the bookends. And George Fant, I think, is one of the better backup tackles now in the NFL, coming to Seattle behind Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Going to be continuing our training camp preview position by position, inside linebackers coming up tomorrow. Make sure that you are listening in and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in. Go Hawks.